sparing men, women, and little children, victims of a system that makes men torture and imprison innocent people.
You cannot shake hands with a clenched fist.
Produced by a nuclear exchange would be carried by wind and water and soil and sea to the far corners of the kingdom of God, the kingdom of heaven.
That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
We're not saying that planet Earth is coming to an end. We're saying that planet Earth is about to be refurbished, spaded under, and have another chance to serve as a garden for another civilization.
Most of the people in here are just your reflections. They're your mistakes.
1776 will commence again if you try to take our firearms.
1 million of the planet's 8 million species are threatened.
You are what you repeatedly do. Therefore, excellence ought to be a habit, not an act.
Your lives and the credibility of the United Nations is at stake.
I've seen him kill himself.
The reason this is such an interesting time is not only because we're on the threshold of the end of this civilization.
They're trying to take you out with bullshit.
The experience of the past 2 years has proven beyond doubt that no nation can appease the Nazi.
For those who can hear me, I say, do not despair. The misery that is now upon us is but the passing of greed, the bitterness of men, fear the way of human progress. The hate of men will pass, and dictators die, and the power they took from the people will return to the people. And so long as men die, liberty will never perish.
In the language of the U.S. Department of Defense, these are unidentified aerial phenomena.
Roswell is a very interesting place. There are a lot of people that would like to know what's going on.
There's very compelling evidence that we may not be alone.
This is the Garden of Doom.
Welcome, everyone, into Garden of Doom. And this week we're really living up to our name because we have, well, not because of who our guest is, but because of the topic. Our guest is one of our friends, Reverend Jim Willis. He's been on, I think, 3 times before. He's the author of at least 14 books, but one is coming out, and I think one recently came, so it's probably up to 16, maybe 20 at this point. Yeah, and we are talking about today comparative eschatology. So end of days. So really today, Garden of Doom stuff all the way in. And because Jim is an expert on these things, actually wrote a book called The Religion Book, and also a book called Armeggedon. There's probably no better source that I know in that, in this area, and probably no better guest that you know, especially when it comes to comparative eschatology as opposed to one type. So we are in your hand, Reverend. Thank you so much. I guess, again, remind the folks who you are. But if they're interested, there's 3 prior shows. Oh, my goodness. What do you even remember what the prior shows were?
I can't remember. I know we had a good time.
Yeah, well, one was on Censoring God, the book where I think I probably first became.
Yeah, we probably got together when Quantum Akashic Field came out.
Yep.
And maybe Ancient Civilizations or something like that.
Yeah, we definitely did some. We did. We covered Sumerian, and I think maybe another. It doesn't matter. Look up the other shows. Check out all of those stuff. They're all great shows. Censoring God is one of my favorite books in this arena.
Thanks, Jeff. It's good. It's good to be with you. When you called and said you wanted to do something on comparative eschatology, I loved it because all these special fields like physics and other kinds of branches of the science and archaeology, they all have their separate vocabulary that they use, the in group. And when we can claim comparative eschatology, that puts us right up there with the best of them. I love it.
Oh yeah, good. Okay, well, stumbled into that one. That's great.
When we talk about comparative eschatology, all we're doing is really comparing what different religions think is going to happen at what is sometimes called the end of days or the end times or whatever. And it's amazing how how different they are, but it's also amazing how many similarities they have. They're all looking for the same kind of things.
Indeed.
So it's a fascinating subject. It really is.
Folks, forgive the beeps because I'm sort of playing with the volume. Yeah. So I mean, I think everybody's heard of Revelations. I'm not sure if they know everything about it. I think everybody has heard of Ragnarok. It's sort of been changed a lot by, Marvel Comics and the MCU. Right. People hear terms like Hades, Tartarus, Duatl, Sheol, Gehenna, just plain old underworld, limbo, purgatory. Though I learned or remembered that apparently the Catholic Church eliminated the doctrine of purgatory about 15 years ago or something, that was a strange flex. And I think one of the important things that I've learned is that the concepts involving hell and the afterlife, at least in some Christian doctrine, like most of it is about 600 years old. I mean, where it's sort of got where, ink went to vellum or whatever they were using at the time. So yeah, but enough of the Jeff show. Let's get to the expert. You can start where I don't, whether or not you start chronologically and move forward, or whether you start with the major religions and sort of point it backwards. We're in your hands.
Well, thank you. I really, really appreciate the opportunity. When we start talking about the end of the world and we start talking about concepts, we're kind of stuck. We can't go back to prehistoric times. We know that probably at Göbekli Tepe and Karahan Tepe, that these temples in Turkey, relatively recently discovered, they probably had a lot to say about how the world is going to end. And it probably had a lot to do with comets, and because we can see some of their etchings on stone, some of their stone carvings that seem to indicate constellations in the heavens, and it seems to indicate comets. But they don't say anything because they didn't have a written language per se. And that's the definition of prehistory. Prehistory means before there was a written language. So when we really begin talking, we have to start talking about, in terms of actual people's ideas of what they really believe, we have to wait for texts to come out. We have to wait for the invention of writing. So that really only takes us back about, maybe 8,000 years, something like that. We have snippets of texts from Babylon. We have snippets of texts from Sumeria. But the actual writing really doesn't start to take place until the birth of Hinduism. So I suppose we really have to start there at Hinduism. And yet having to decide to start at Hinduism creates another problem, because there is no one religion called Hinduism, like Catholicism or Protestantism. Hinduism is a family of religions. There's more than 1 million gods in Hindu thing, but there is a kind of a general consensus, if you will. It kind of comes from the very, very early Hindu texts, and now we're talking 6,000 years BCE. So we can go back 8,000 years, 7,000 years. It's 6,000 years. We're on a lot surer footing. But basically in Hinduism, there came this idea that has been rehashed by a lot of other religions too, that the idea is that there are cycles. Hinduism, classic Hindu, I almost hesitate to call it theology because it's not about a god, but classic Hinduism echoes a lot of what quantum physicists are discovering. The Hindu rishis 6,000 years ago had a way of describing realities and a way of describing. They even talked about the Big Bang in effect. We've got the Hindu concept of Krishna, or the whole idea of the lotus blossom, for instance, when Brahman sleeps on the lotus and out of his navel flows, and the whole Hindu thing comes in. But they believed like a lot of physicists and cosmologists do today, that there are cycles to the universe. And within the current aeon or eon that we're in right now, kalpa, there are 1,000 cycles that can be divided into yugas or epochs. And each of them has within the 4 ages, so to speak, and they're encompassing a beginning of complete purity. It begins with everything is just great, complete purity, but then it falls into total decay. It's not evolution, it's devolution. And it's the evolution, the devolution of Dharmic principles. Dharmic is the teaching. And the 4 yugas that end the last 4 ages end with the Kali Yuga, which is 432,000 years old. That's the one we're in right now. So we're in the last of the 4 ages, the last of the 4 epochs. And this epoch has been foretold to be characterized by impiety, by violence, by decay. Back in the Vishnu Purana, which is a very early text, about 100 BCE, we read that social status depends not upon your accomplishments, but in the ownership of property. That becomes important at the end. Not what you've done, but what you own. Sound familiar?
Yeah.
And they say that wealth is now the source of virtue. Virtue is not found within, it's how much money you have. How big, important character you are. Passion and luxury are the sole bonds between spouses, for instance. Falsity, lying, are the conditions of success in life. Those who are successful at the end times they are liars. And they're false. And sexuality is the sole source of human enjoyment at the end times. Religion is superficial, and it becomes an empty ritual. People may go to temples or may go to different places of worship, but they don't really believe anything. They're confused. They confused religion with spirituality. Now that was written, 2,000. A little more than 2,100 years ago. And pretty good description of our age. It's probably a pretty good description of any age, but at least we know about this one. The 4th age of Hinduism is ruled over by Kali, not the goddess Kali, but the demon Kali. In other words, there's a demon in control of the world. It kind of echoes what we read in 1 John in the New Testament of the Christian Bible. The whole world is in the hands of the evil one, John says. And the Puranas go to write that kings in the 4th age, or leaders in the 4th age, they're going to be godless. And I love this one. They're going to be wanting in tranquility. Don't you love that? They're going to be quick to anger and dishonest. Boy, all you have to do is read about rural leaders getting together and talking back and forth, and you get that whole idea of quick to anger and dishonest. And it says, and in this age, in this final age also, they're going to inflict death, not just in warfare, but they're going to inflict death on women and children. Boy, doesn't that take you right to right to Ukraine today. It said they're going to inflict death on women and children, and the leaders will rise and fall to power quickly, and undisciplined barbarians will receive the support of rulers. Now that's quite a change from classic Hinduism, because the 4 pillars of Dharma, or the teaching of Hinduism, which was taken over by Buddha, really, and he had his own take on the Dharma. But the 4 pillars of Dharma were considered penance and charity and truthfulness and compassion. And they say that at the end of time, only charity will remain, although it too is going to decrease almost daily. The Hindu writers said that in the last days, people will commit sin in their mind and in their speech and in their action. And we're going to see plagues. I didn't say COVID, but plagues, famine, pestilence, natural calamities. Californians, are you listening today? And it said that people aren't going to believe one another. And that, I love this one, especially in the news today. They said, remember now, this is more than 2,100 years ago. They said at the end times of history, falsehoods are going to win disputes. People win arguments by lying, and brothers will become avaricious. And as each age progresses, the human lifespan is going to start to decrease, starting from, what they talked about in the Santa Yuga, 100 years, to the current Kali. It's going to see the Yuga is going to come way back, way down. And of course, our lifetime has just started to decrease. There are going to be many false religions, the Hindu rishis said. And many people will profess false knowledge to earn their livelihood. I hope some of the newscasters on big networks are listening to some of that. False knowledge is going to be decimated, not for any other reason except the people who decimate it want to earn their livelihood. And as each age progresses, life is going to become short, miserable. Marriage is going to be for pleasure alone. They talk about droughts, they call it being dry of water will be the definition of the land. All I can think about is what's going on in Utah right now with Great Salt Lake. Any hard to reach water is going to be a destination for a pilgrimage. And it talks about at the very end times, people are going to be hiding in valleys between mountains. And they're going to be suffering greatly from cold and exposure. And people are going to wear clothes of tree bark and leaves. Matter of fact, they go on to say that people will live less than 23 years. That was something to say that long ago.
Yeah.
And the pretense, I love this one. One of the great texts from the ancient scriptures. Pretense of greatness will be the proof of it. Wow. Isn't that something? Pretense of greatness will be the proof of it. And ultimately, humankind is going to be destroyed. And we're going to start all over again. And that's where Hinduism does have some good things going for it, because whenever you come to the end of one of these things, and this has happened infinite number of times in the past, whenever you come to the end, it starts over and you begin again.
There's a lot of those, there's a lot of ages of man throughout the world. And, you have to wonder if there's a root culture for it or a root belief system, whether it was in the campfires somewhere, in the giant circle, there would be the steps to sort of, I guess you'd say northern Iraq, Iran, some of them, Ministan, Afghanistan, India these days, or if it was in the campfires of what is now the Sahara Desert, but was then the plush, just like the Serengeti or Morpho.
Sure.
Who knows? But the Mayans have the 5 ages of man. The Greeks had the 5 ages of man. Now, of course, the fifth was right after the Age of Heroes, and I guess would be now. But which might be the last, I suppose. I'm not sure. Maybe the Norse sort of, we went through all stages, but there was only sort of one stage of man till Ragnorak, and then presumably there'd be another. I'm not entirely clear on that. But, the years 432,000, that's remarkably similar to the Sumerian, list of kings, 432,000. The Egyptians also have a list of the pharaohs and kings. I don't think it's exactly the same amount of time, but it's
pretty close.
Up there.
It's up there. And the ages have been in Babylonian and Sumerian texts. The ages of people were much bigger, even in early Judaism. When you got Methuselah living 969 years, and then it said that now after the flood and everything else, and we start, and now this time they said the age of man is going to be 70 years, basically 70 years, and that was more than 2,000 years ago when that was written. So you
Right.
have that.
At some point, wasn't it 120 years was the original punishment? Then it got reduced to 70. But the fun thing is that, listen, I don't know if it's right because science keeps changing, but at some point about 5 years ago, I read that scientists have figured out that the maximum age that a person could live, at least, obviously there's going to be some variance, is about 117 years, which is remarkably close to that 120, right?
Yeah, it is. It is. It really is. It makes you wonder because, this is not a new thing that we're going through. A lot of people think, we hear all these doom and gloom ideas and that we're thinking, well, at the end of history. But no, the over and over again, it goes way back in history. As soon as men could start to write, basically, they started writing about the end of the world. It seems to be
feeling that has
with all of us.
I'm feeling that's part of the thesis of your forthcoming book, right? Which is, isn't it about cults?
Yes. Well, it just came out 2 days ago, as a matter of fact. American Cults. Yeah, American Cults. And it's been for sale on Amazon for a while, but it just came out on Tuesday. I think was the first day that it was offered for regular sale, and it's out in bookstores, and Amazon is now delivering them.
Well, we don't want to get too much into cults now. We should that should be our next topic. Let's talk about your book. But I mean, it plays into this because one of the things that cults do is they take 2 days events and put them into scripture, and they say, "See, this is that." But when it doesn't happen, they go, "Okay, we got this part wrong, but that was the precursor. That's the bridge. We didn't get it wrong. It was just the start. The finish is now. It wasn't 2012. 2012 was the start." And the new date is 2028. But watch, that's just the start.
Yeah.
And you have to wait till 2030 for, and it's not just those kind. I mean, even the Heaven's Gate, everyone's immortal. And then I forget, it was like D and Dada or whatever were the names. And, one of them died of cancer. And then it was like, no, she didn't die. Her soul went first to clear the way for us.
Yeah. That's right.
And the followers just did it.
And that's why, people talk about this just being interesting, but I think it's not only interesting, it's important because take Waco, for instance, the classic confrontation at Waco. Here's David Koresh, who had been writing a great treatise on the book of Revelation and on the book of Daniel. And he had described in this treaty and in this treatise, in this book that he was writing, that the end time was going to be full of confusion, that the governments were going to come after the true believers, and Koresh believed that his group was the true believers in Waco, that there was going to be a great war to end all wars, that there was going to be noise and thunder and confusion and signs in the heavens. If people had studied what he was studying, the American government wouldn't have handled Waco like they did, because what they did was they surrounded the compound, and they began trying to bring the people of the compound down to their knees. And so what they would do, they would play jarring rock music with explosions and lights flashing across the heavens. And there was noise and it was confusion. It went on day after day after day. What the American government was trying to do was use basic techniques to make the people come out and give up. What they were doing instead, because they didn't know any of this stuff that we're talking about, they were replicating exactly the very same thing that Koresh said was going to happen at the end of days.
Right.
So when those people of Waco,
buffets,
when they saw all that stuff, they said, "Here it is. It's got to be the end." They had, they couldn't get outside the compound. They didn't have any communication outside, so they assumed this was probably happening all over the world. They didn't know. And as a result, all those people died. There was no reason for that. And it was just because the people in charge didn't know the kinds of things that we're talking about, didn't consider them important. They thought anybody who did consider them, like you and I, well, we're just a bunch of, fruitcakes who are interested in our own thing. We don't know anything about the real world. As a result, if they could have talked to me or they could have talked to you, and either one of us could have said to them, "No, you're going about it the wrong way. Come on, you got the right idea, but you're going about it in the wrong way. Don't do it this way. You're bringing to fruition everything that Koresh preached about." And at the end, all those people died, and it was a shame. It was just a shame. It didn't have to be that way. So I think these kinds of talks, this kind of study, comparative eschatology, I think is important, especially if hopefully by the end of our conversation, we can see how many of these groups agree on certain things that are going on right today, that if we can study them, maybe we can change, maybe we can bring something else about.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So we did the Hindu, which I guess, I think if you were to talk to someone from India, they would probably call it Vedic. The
Vedas cover part of this. The Puranas cover part of it. All different kinds of Hindu texts, and I'm not saying that everybody in India believes this. Trust me, they're as divided about a lot of these things as people, in our country about Christianity. But it gives you the idea that there's always a lot going on, especially now. Having talked about Hinduism 5,000 years ago, let's go over to Judaism, because Judaism was developing about the same time in what we now know as Israel. Judaism was developing a concept of eschatology, or the study of the end times, and it was in some ways similar to Hinduism, in some ways different. There wasn't contact, or much contact probably, between the two. But in Judaism, we have to go back to, what the Jews would call Tanakh, or the Hebrew Scriptures. It's pretty much similar to what Christians call the Old Testament of the Bible. But in Ezekiel chapter 38, gives a great description of the final battle of the world, the battle between Gog and Magog. It's a climactic war. And in Judaism, of course, this was written right after the Babylonian captivity. The Babylonians came over, captured Jerusalem in 586 BC, took the cream of the best of the Babylonians back to Babylon with them, and they became slaves there. 4 of those were Daniel, Meshach, and Abednego, and I forgot the 4th one anyway. But Daniel was the chief one, who wrote a book in the Old Testament of the Hebrew Tanakh. That's an example, one of the first examples of really apocalyptic writing. But Ezekiel, who was also taken in that very same captivity, described the war of Gog and Magog. And according to for instance, there's a biblical commentator and a rabbi by the name of David Kimby, or Devad Kimby. This war is going to take place in Jerusalem. And however, the Hasidic tradition, which is another academic side of Judaism, they hold that the war is not going to occur because the suffering of all the people in the exiles down through the age, including and up to and including the Holocaust, the Jewish people have already made up for it, they said. But basically, if you go to the Old Testament, the Hebrew Tanakh, and you begin to read, you read that God is going to redeem the Jewish people from their captivity that began with the Babylonian exile, and then continued when the Romans came in 70 AD and burned down Jerusalem and took the Jews captive into the great diaspora. And that they believe that at the end times of history, God is going to return the Jewish people to the land of Israel. And this is what made the year, was it 1948? Was it 46, 48? I'm not sure which now.
Yeah, 48 is the founding.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and they was going to bring all the Jews back to Israel. And of course, when that happened, and the Jews began to say, wow, we're back in our homeland again. This is the sign of the times. The beginning of the end is here. It also said that God is going to restore the kingly house of David, and the temple in Jerusalem is going to be rebuilt. Well, right now it can't be rebuilt, because where the temple stood now stands a Islamic mosque, right. The big dome of the rock you always see in all the pictures. And that makes a lot of people in America, both Jews and Christians, want to say, well, let's get rid of that, and that's let's get rid of the mosque so we can build the temple and bring back the Messiah. God says that when the temple is restored, when it's rebuilt, there's going to be a regent from the house of David, also known as Messiah, who's going to lead the Jewish people and the world. He's going to usher in the Messianic age, and it's going to be characterized by justice and righteousness and peace, and all nations are going to recognize that the God of Israel is the only true God, and God is going to resurrect the dead, where they, according to most interpretations of this particular ideology, said that they are now sleeping, just like when they died, they fell asleep. They didn't go anywhere. They didn't go to heaven or anything. They fell asleep, and they're going to be restored. And it's just like waking up from a night's sleep,
Now,
and God is going to create
like sort of like the place of constant stillness.
Constant stillness. Yeah. It's Jehovah's Witnesses, or not Jehovah's Witnesses, Seventh-day Adventists have much the same idea today, that when we die, we fall asleep. And at the end of time, we will just like wake up, and we will wake up to a brand new world. And God will have created a new heaven and a new earth. In that sense, they have a lot to do with Christianity, because, in the book of Revelation, John says, I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and there was no more sea, and all this kind of thing. So the idea of a savior is going to come down and save us from ourselves. And that's classic Jewish theology, although, again, just like not all Hindus believe in what we talked about in terms of all people from India don't believe in Hinduism, the Hindu concept, for instance, that we talked about before. All Jews don't accept this either. There's a lot of nuances here and there, just like in Christianity and everything else.
But the Jewish end of days doesn't really start about the end of days. It sounds like it's the start. It's not end of days. It's like the start of the good times.
A new beginning. Yeah, and that has a lot in common with Christianity, because in Christianity, everybody talks about Armageddon being the end. But according to Christianity, Armageddon is it's the end of the beginning, but then there's a new heaven and a new earth, and Christ comes down to earth, and he rules for 1,000 years. And that isn't even the end, because at the end of the 1,000 years, according to classic Christianity, the devil, who has been chained for 1,000 years, is released, and he goes to fight Jesus again, and the armies of the world get together. And after the 1,000 years, what called the millennium, after that's over, Satan is finally destroyed, and then we enter into eternity, for lack of a better word. Not just destroyed,
he's annihilated. That's the but that, I mean, the method of getting there is a bit more colorful, is more cinematic, epical. In the Christian version, the Jewish version seems it's you just have to. I mean, obviously that pesky mosque in that place. So, though I'm not really sure was that specific about that temple. Like, why not any temple? I mean, a mosque is just a different word for a type of temple. So, I mean, I don't want to get a whole lot of people mad at me right now, but I mean, if there is one God, I have trouble believing that he'd be or she or it, probably sexless, would be that picky about the particular denomination of the building was there to
according to the strict interpretation of the text, and there are strict Jews over in Israel. I talked to some of them when I was over there, who actually they believe that the new temple has to be built according to a certain blueprint, which is found in the Old Testament. It has to be a certain size. It has to have a certain number of doors and all the rest of this stuff. And I will admit,
God's an architect. I mean, a very picky architect. God's like the Karen of home remodelers and wants her home. I'm not here to mock. I just
no. It is interesting though that the Apostle Paul, who wrote a third of the Christian New Testament, was of course Jewish. He was a rabbinic scholar, and as a Jew, he talked about Jewish history, and he talked about what's going to happen at the end of days. And so when we read his writing, we're actually reading that we already talked about the Hindu concept of what's going to happen at the end and what the world is going to be like. Well, compare that to the Apostle Paul when he said this in terms of Judaism. He said, there will be terrible times in the last days. People will be lovers of themselves. They will be lovers of money. They will be boastful, proud, abusive, disobedient to their parents. They will be ungrateful, unholy, without love, unforgiving, slanderous, without self-control, brutal, not lovers of the good. They will be treacherous and rash and conceited and lovers of pleasure rather than lovers of God. And catch this, he said the very same thing that we read about the Hinduism idea in the last time. They will have a form of godliness. In other words, they will have religion, but they will deny its power. Almost word for word, classic Hinduism and classic Judaism. I find it, or classic, at least, of that style. And I find it amazing that they are so similar.
Indeed. I'm starting to find it less and less amazing because I've sort of tracked it as the language moved and as the language groups grew from similar roots that some of the concepts were borrowed. But they just like real world, they go back and forth. Also in the Bible, you have the words Hades and Tartarus, which are, of course, are associated with Greek and not at all what you would consider Hebrew or Canaanite or whatever. But yet these words they get translated. I was listening. I was watching a YouTube thing where a gentleman was saying that Tartarus and Hades are synonymous. No, they're not. They're not synonymous. And if anything, Tartarus is probably more synonymous with Duatel. Where I think it was Raphael, where he deposited Azazel in the Book of Enoch. Sort of the fallen, the leader or one of the leaders of the fallen ones, the Watchers. Sort of like where Zeus put the Titans. Which are maybe a different type of fallen one. Even though they were full gods, but I guess angels are agents of gods and immortal with powers, but not gods, which is another sort of concept I don't quite get, but all right.
And it's just as fascinating. You don't even have to be involved with religion to do this. You can look at Plato, the philosophers. When Plato wrote the Timaeus, he wrote about the continent of Atlantis. Now, whether or not you take Atlantis as an actual geographical location or whether it's a metaphor isn't it really important for our discussion here. What's important is what he said about it. And Atlantis was destroyed in a day and a night. And when he was asked why, he said, because for many generations, they obeyed the laws and they loved the divine to which they were akin. I love that sentence. They were akin to the divine. They were, I think of the words of Jesus, know ye not that ye are gods, And he said, these people were akin to the divine. And these people in Atlantis, at first, he said, they reckoned that qualities of character were far more important than prosperity. And so, because of these beliefs, they bore the burden of their wealth and possessions lightly, and they didn't let their high standard of living intoxicate them or make them lose their self-control. But then he went on and said, but when the divine element in them became weakened, when they no longer identified with the divine, and their human traits rose to the surface and became predominant, then they ceased to be able to carry their prosperity with moderation. Boy, there's Plato writing, 2,500 years ago, and he's describing the very same thing that the Hindu religion said. He's describing the very same thing that Judaism said. He's describing a lot of what the New York Times says about us today. It's just amazing. And because of this, he said they were destroyed. Makes you kind of wonder, are we going to be the next lost civilization? Well,
it's amazing. You just quoted Timaeus, and I've been doing a side project, which might make its way to Garden of Doom, but it's for somebody else's show they invited me on. And Plato's Republic came up, where he talks about the myth of
yes.
And also Hades. And he says all humans go there. And this predates the Bible, obviously, and Hades, not necessarily the ideas in the Bible, because I don't want to get into that, but the word, the writing.
Mm-hmm.
The Bible, I think, was the Book of Moses was written, about 3,300 years ago, 3,500
Well,
years?
over a long period of time, yeah. It started back then, and then it was added on to for, 1,000 years.
Now, they did have the Elysian fields where the righteous waited,
Mm-hmm.
and Hades is where, I guess, everyone else, but it wasn't exactly lake of fire versus paradise.
Yeah. It's interesting. It's interesting that you should talk about Plato writing about because I'm involved right now in writing a book about near-death experiences for Visible Ink, which won't come out for a year. But just in this last week, I've been dealing with the material of Plato and writing about who had a near-death experience and came back and told people about it. Synchronicity, Jeff. We're on the same page once again.
Yeah, listen. You know how honored I am to even think that you think that we're on the same page and we're
definitely.
I mean, you're a professional. I'm an amateur, though. I'm getting good enough to fool professionals that I know more than I do. So
all of us are in that boat, Jeff.
That's fair enough. Yeah, that's the kind of modesty that's going to get you in good standing and keep you from that pride. Which Lucifer was. Yeah,
if enough of us do it, maybe we can even put off the end for a while if we can return to what's really important.
That's right.
Instead of neglecting the divine and thinking that we are our possessions are more important than prosperity, and prosperity is more important than our sense of ego and who we are and all that kind of stuff.
Right, how we comport ourselves versus what we collect. But
But
since we start talking about Daniel and Revelations, I guess we might as well get into the exciting part, because before we get to that 1,000 years and that second war, final wrath, and between whether or not you believe the Enochian tales of the Watchers and the first revolt of God, in between those two is Revelations and Daniel and Ezekiel and all that. So we what causes that, aside from what we've talked about before? What is the trigger, and what does it look like?
Well, in terms of Christianity, for instance, you mean?
Sure.
What? It's interesting. You should say that. I'm in my office right now, and I'm looking at my computer screen. But right behind the computer screen is a big window that looks out to the woods where we live. And we started talking about what's really important in life. And a herd of 5 deer just came out of the woods and started feeding right on my front lawn. If that isn't a sign of peace, I don't know what is. So maybe that's a good sign. Maybe that was a sign. Maybe that was a sign from heaven. Christianity. Being a Christian pastor for 40 years, and I still have the Reverend in front of my name. I choose not to use it. I prefer Jim. But whenever I heard people talk about Christianity, Christians believe this or Christians believe that, I always have to shudder. Because Christianity, of all the major religions in the world, they are probably the ones that are most divided about how the end times are going to come to pass. A lot of people say, Christians believe Jesus is going to come back. Well, a lot of Christians don't believe that. There are a lot of Christians who simply, they say it, they mouth the words, we believe he will come again and receive us unto himself and all this kind of thing. And you hear it a lot at funerals. But the idea of a physical return of Jesus Christ isn't nearly as widespread in Christianity as people think it is. Now, that's more on the liberal side of Christianity. As a matter of fact, I begin to think sometimes that probably the return of Christ is what separates what we call liberal Christianity from conservative Christianity. But in conservative Christianity, there's definitely a long tradition of the return of Jesus Christ, which is going to end this age. And that's common to conservative Christianities such as fundamentalists and evangelicals and Pentecostals and charismatics and like that, believe in a physical return of Jesus Christ. But even that isn't unified. We talked earlier about the millennium, the 1,000-year reign of Christ. The book of Revelation talks about that, devotes a chapter to it right toward the end. But before that millennium, people say that, well, Jesus is going to come back. But not all Christians agree there either. Conservative Christians. Some are called premillennialists because they believe Jesus will come back before the millennium of 1,000 years. And some are called postmillennialists because they believe Christ is going to come back at the end of the millennium.
Who's going to rule during that 1,000 years? If he's supposed to rule, is he going to have like viceroys or regents or whatever?
Well, that's all up for grabs too. A lot of people say he's going to rule through earthly leaders.
Okay, I vote for you.
Yeah, well, no, thank you. But at any rate, of the Christians who do believe in the return of Christ, the literal return of Christ, probably by far the most of them believe in what they call the premillennial return of Jesus Christ. But even that is a problem, because before the millennium comes in, there are some very disputed verses from the Apostle Paul and from the book of Revelation, and some from the book of Daniel in the Old Testament, Daniel chapter 7 especially, that said that there's going to be a 7-year period on earth before the millennium, and that period is going to be called the tribulation. Comes from Jesus's words, saying, "Before I return, there will be great tribulation." And you might say, "Well, where do you get where's the number 7? How come it's going to be 7 years?"
Where isn't the number 7?
Well, that comes from the book of Daniel, believe it or not. Daniel said there's going to be 490 years to accomplish all of this, and after 483 years, God's time clock is going to kind of stop, and there's going to be a parenthesis dropped in. And he believed that God's time, those who follow this, espouse this from the book of Daniel, believe that after 483 years, God's time clock stopped when Jesus came into the city on Palm Sunday, and he was crucified a week later. So 483 years, the Messiah came, offered the people the kingdom. They rejected it, according to this view, crucified Jesus, and God's time clock stopped, and it will begin again. The last 7 years will play out before the millennium. But during those 7 years, during that parenthesis between the 483 years and the 490 years, there is going to be the Christian age, which was dropped into the slot. Now we get even a little farther out there, because the Christian age has been going on now for about 2,000 years, according to this view, ever since from Palm Sunday until the return of Jesus Christ. And during this time, the Holy Spirit has been involved in the earth. Now, this is interesting because there's a particular Christian Trinitarian concept that says in the 2,000 years between the Great Flood, or between Adam and Eve being kicked out of the garden, and Abraham coming back, there was a 2,000 years during which God the Father ruled on earth. And then beginning with Abraham, when all of a sudden God started to appear to people right and left, that happened about 2,000 years ago. They figured Abraham is about 2,000 years ago. So that was the beginning of the second period when God appeared to everyone, eventually appearing as Jesus Christ. And this was the time when God the Son ruled on earth. And then when Jesus was taken up and the Holy Spirit came down, that was about 2,000 years ago. So now we're in the last 2,000 years of history, when God the Holy Spirit rules on earth. Now, does this sound familiar to Christians? Father, Son, Holy Spirit. Each one of them rules for 2,000 years on earth. That gives 6,000 years. And then the millennium is the 7th year with Christ, the 7,000th year. So that gives a period of 7,000 years of history. Father, Son, Holy Spirit, and millennium. And isn't that a nice, neat little concept that you can wrap up with a bow? And that's what
lucky number 7, but it's also unlucky 7 because we've got the 7 tribulations, which I guess we need to get to the end. But there's the 7 deadly sins. There's the 7 horns on the
the 7 bowls of wrath, the 7 candlesticks, the 7 parchments, the 7 seals,
the 7 princes of hell.
Yeah.
So what are the 7 seals or the 7 signs, or is that even?
The number 7 is just considered to be the number of God. It's fascinating. If you go through the book of Revelation, and you look at the descriptions of God or the descriptions of Jesus, his hair was like wool, his skin shone like this, his body was like this. Every one of those is a sevenfold description. You have 7 aspects of what God would have looked like. So that number 7 is the biggie, of course. But it's interesting because now we think, well, we got Christianity all tied up in a nice, neat bow. We got Father, Son, Holy Spirit, got the millennium there. That's great. Jesus coming back before the tribulation makes perfect sense. Those who, before the final tribulation, the last 7 years of history. Unfortunately, even those who believe that Christ is coming back before the millennium are divided up into 3 different camps too. And they're called the pre-tribulationists. They believe that Jesus is going to come back before the tribulation, and they believe he's going to come back not to earth, but he's going to come back to, in effect, snatch up. The Latin word is raptura, from where we get the word rapture. He's going to snatch up the believers who are still alive before the tribulation begins, so they don't have to go through it. And they're going to all of a sudden disappear. Hopefully one of them won't be an airplane pilot with a plane full of people, or hopefully one of them won't be a taxi cab driver with people in the back seat when all of a sudden he disappears, and what's going to happen to earth and everything else. Those are called pre-tribulationists. But then there's another group of Christians that are called mid-tribulationists, and they believe that the tribulation is going to begin, and 3.5 years into the tribulation, Jesus is going to come back and take up his believers in the rapture during the tribulation. That leaves 3.5 years of history. But then there's the post-tribulationists who believe that Christ is going to come back at the end of the tribulation, which will also mark the Battle of Armageddon, which will also mark the beginning of the millennium. So I would love to say that here's Christianity in a nice, neat concept. This is what Christians believe. Unfortunately, you get 2 Christians in a room, you're going to have 3 opinions. I guarantee it.
Let's try not to be tied. Let's not try to reconcile all of them, and let's just say that there's lots of different interpretations of things.
Yes.
So what are these 7 seals? What's the Antichrist? How do you know the difference between the Antichrist, if in fact the Antichrist is the false prophet, or if the false prophet leads the Antichrist, and the Messiah? Who are these 4 horsemen?
Okay. This is going to be tough. If people really want to go into this in detail, I wrote the religion book 20 years ago. I wrote it pretty. I covered this in pretty good detail, and it still stands. So that might be a good place to start. But at any rate, to get into some of this idea. The idea of the Antichrist is really big. The Antichrist comes from 2 books of the Bible, the book of Revelation and the book of 1 John. 1 John says, anyone who is against Christ is Antichrist. But when you talk about the Antichrist, you're talking about a world ruler according to the book of Revelation. And this world ruler is going to deceive the world into believing that good is bad and bad is good and up is down and down is up and all the rest of the stuff. People are going to flock to him for no other reason than his charismatic, demonic personality. He's going to have a religious a sidekick with him that is sometimes called the false prophet, who is religious in the sense that people really respond to his religious teachings, but he's a false prophet. He's not really the prophet. And this Antichrist is going to be full of the devil. He's going to be demon-possessed, of course, devil-possessed. And he's going to bring together the nations of the world, and he's going to create, according to the most fanatics of these, probably the most well-known was Hal Lindsey, when back in the 70s he wrote The Late Great Planet Earth, which was the thing that kicked this whole thing off in this country. It was a popular, really popular book. I think it was on the New York Times bestseller list for, 50, 60 weeks, something like that. Any evangelical or fundamentalist minister has got got a copy of The Late Great Planet Earth on his bookshelf. I went through 3 or 4 of them back when I was a fundamentalist myself, and it was just extremely popular. And then he followed it up by the book called The New World Coming, or There's a New World Coming, and that was a kind of a popular expose of the book of Revelation according to Hal Lindsey, who was a product of Dallas Seminary, which is, of course, the biggest, probably the Baptist seminary. And so it was a very fundamentalist explanation, but it was very well written. And he kind of brought all of this stuff together within these two books. And people just latched onto it. And all of a sudden, everybody started hearing about the four horsemen of the apocalypse. The four horsemen of the apocalypse were the four horsemen who were going to come, and they were going to bring war and death and destruction and plague upon the earth. Whenever anybody starts to say, each of them had a different color horse, which the symbolism stood for a different, black and red and white and pale. I'm not what, but they became so popular that movies were made of them. For instance, when Clint Eastwood made his great film about what was the name of it? About the preacher who was always a gunman, and Pale Rider, I guess it was called. Yeah, Pale Rider. He was on the pale horse, bringing death and destruction with him. So the Four Horsemen. The Four Horsemen also show up. One of my favorite television series of all times. The Swordman. About the Scottish swordman. Yes, that's right. There was one episode in the Highlander where it turns out that one of the four horsemen, all of the four horsemen, were immortals.
Sure.
And one of them, the one who hid out in the monastery, getting out of the fight for 2,000 years, it turns out that he was one of the four horsemen who had repented for his action and went into a life of solitude in a seminary, or teaching in a church. So he on holy ground. It very popular concept. But the Book of Revelation has 3 different episodes where sevens figure into it. There are the 7 seals and the 7 bowls of wrath, the 7 parchments, the 7, each time. And there's a big disagreement as to whether these are 3 different ways of talking about the same thing. But what it all boils down to is that 7 times the angels release these things, and some of them might be plagues, or some of them might be wars, or some of them might be environmental catastrophes, or all this kind of thing. The 7 plagues and that all takes place during the tribulation. Earth is just bombarded by all of this devilish stuff. Earth is basically in the hands of the evil one, the Antichrist. And at the end of time, he gathers up his armies. Jesus Christ comes back, and the Antichrist, of course, is defeated. And the Antichrist is put away for 1,000 years. And it turns out he is what in the book of Revelation says, he is that old serpent, the devil. In the book of Genesis, when the serpent gives Eve the apple, it never calls him the devil. We don't know he's the devil until we get to Revelation. And the Christian guy who wrote Revelation says that was the devil. And so the earth is going to go through all of these things. Well, this is great for cults and stuff like that, because boy, talk about crystal ball gazing, and talk about conspiracy theories. I mean, Revelation is full of them, and all this hidden language, all this apocalyptic language is just, it's fun to read, but I want to tell you, it can get you depressed.
No, absolutely. Really, and it's very confusing because, you can look for the Messiah and the Antichrist anywhere. I mean, I listen, I'm old enough to, but also young enough to, Clinton was the Antichrist, Obama was the Antichrist, Trump was the Antichrist. Everyone can be the Antichrist. Putin is the Antichrist.
My favorite was Gorbachev, because he had that birthmark on his forehead. That was the mark of the beast. Yeah. Yes. Or Napoleon. There's a little hint given in the Revelation. You can tell him because you can tell who it is because of his name. And here is the code to remember his name. 666. That's the mark of the Antichrist. And everybody has tried to figure out all kinds of code-breaking ways to figure out who. You can take Napoleon and give each number a numerical equivalent, and it comes up to 666 if you follow one pattern. You can do the same thing with Hitler. People did it with Clinton. They did it with Reagan, especially Ronald Reagan, because he had 3 names that all had 6 letters in them. Oh. That must mean he was the Antichrist, right? I mean, there's just all kinds of ways of translating and conspiracy.
Wasn't 666 a mistranslation from Old Hebrew? Wasn't it 616?
Well, that's the latest. We have some very early texts that have a different number. They don't have 666. Some of them have 667. Some of them have different ways. But there are some very early texts that don't list the number 666, but they list a different number. And those are usually conveniently swept under the rug, because who wants to open up a can of worms when you don't need
to? Symmetrical. It's also 1 under 7, which
1 under 7. Yeah, so 3 times. Actually, you can say it's 3 times short of 7, which is,
Yeah, that's true. That's fun too. But you can also say that we were fooled by looking for 666 when all along we should have been looking for something else.
Yeah, and and this was true in Judaism and Christianity. Islam picked Islam picked right up on it too. Because of course Muhammad revered the Bible. He considered it. He called it the book. Right. And he considered the Quran to be an additional book, but he valued the Bible. And so in the Quran and in other Islamic literature, we read there's distinctive signs before the world ends. And he picked right up on this whole Judaism Christianity thing. He said, before the world ends, there's going to be an era of trials and tribulations, and there's going to be a time of immorality, followed by mighty wars and worldwide unnatural phenomena, and the return of justice to the world, which helps explain what motivates a lot of Islamic believers. They are trying to bring this about because they honestly believe in their hearts that this is going to happen, and we're fighting it. They consider themselves freedom fighters. The defining figures that are going to show up at the end time, such as the Mahdi. That's, we read that in the Quran, but the second coming of Jesus. Muslims accept the second coming of Jesus too. He's going to bring about a heavenly victory against the Antichrist. He's going to release Gog and Magog to the world. And some people have identified this with the Soviet Union or China or all these other things. And once all these events are
these Gog and Magog, I've seen that a lot, but I've never actually tried.
Yeah, well, there are 2 verses. They show up first in Ezekiel 38. There are 2 countries, and nobody knows for sure who they are. Ezekiel starts talking about them as if they're countries, but then they become personalities, almost like demonic personalities. And Russia is supposed to be Gog, and Magog, up until recently, was considered China, which was going to be Russia's sidekick. That was Gog and Magog. And they were going to be unleashed on the world, but they were going to be destroyed. And once all the events are completed, the universe, according to Islam now, the universe will be destroyed. Every human being would be resurrected and then held accountable for their deeds. Excuse me. And until that time, senseless immorality would prevail. And that has a
question,
great...
man. I don't know if you have a good answer for this or not, but if Russia is generally considered to be Gog and Magog is considered to be, was China or whatever, maybe it doesn't matter who Magog is at the moment. But why would Iran, who basically runs by Sharia law, strict Islamic law, why would they be cozying up to Russia for so long now?
Yeah. Well, maybe Iran is Magog. Who knows? It's hard to tell. The way these theories go. But that does describe a lot of what's going on. People talk about Islam and how they treat women, especially how women are now allowed to dress, for instance, and in some countries how they are so persecuted. I was over in Egypt, and we had a group of us. Some women went across the street to go to the bazaar that was over there, and some of the Egyptians on the street took one look at him dressed in American clothes, and they started after him. We had to go over and protect our women, because the Muslims believed that immorality would prevail, and they put this all on women. And it's wrong, but that's what happens.
Oh, well, that dates back to even before Eve took a bite out of the apple. That goes back to, I mean, if you can find the oldest story, you can find the woman and the serpent sort of almost being conflated at a certain point.
Yeah. Islam talks about the prevalence of tyrants and the use of alcohol. Of course, strict Islam, Islamic believer doesn't drink. Satanic music was going to cover the world, and so they listen to some of this music that we listen to, and that's music of Satan, that kind of thing. Fornication was going to be so prevalent. Homosexuality, disobedient wives, that's a biggie in that. Murders and lying and cheating and disinterest in and ignorance of religion. But they also couple that with the fact that there's going to be a lot of unnatural phenomenon, a lot of sudden deaths, excessive lightning, excessive earthquakes, destructive rainfall, terrible drought, a huge cloud of smoke, the opening up of huge cracks in the earth through earthquakes.
That's familiar.
It does, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And the sun is going to rise in the west, and the breeze that is going to carry the souls of the faithful beyond this earthly sphere.
Well, that particular one I'm not worried about.
Yeah, again, we can't say that all Muslims believe in all of this, but this was a kind of a classic traditional form of Islamic understanding of the end times. So, boy, you put all this together, and isn't it amazing how much they have in common about what the end days are going to look like? And then if you want to get really depressed, how much does that look like today? It's kind of scary. Where there's smoke, there's fire. Are we living in the midst of a fire?
This is where I take solace in what the great philosopher Billy Joel said in his song when he said, the good old times weren't always good.
Yeah.
Tomorrow ain't as bad as it seems. So I think, and listen, the Chinese had the old curse that you have to think about for a second, but it said, may you live in interesting times, because I think everybody lives in interesting times, and they always wish they were living in either a simpler time or a different paradise in the future.
Yeah, what we're talking about is new. The fact that this stuff has been around, since early Hinduism, 6,000 years.
Now the stakes do get higher. I mean, it's one thing if Rome and Parthia are at war, that's going to be catastrophic for that region, and then maybe some spillover. I mean, the stakes are higher now because of the weapons we have, and because it is sort of a intertwined global world. I don't think that's the same as one world government, but I do understand if you are afraid of the one world government as being a sign of the impending doom, that you'd be worried about globalization, which so it's almost like cyclical. The one thing feeds itself, but the end of it, the answer is either you lean into it and wait for whoever your Messiah is to come and go through it, or you just move to the country and live a simpler life without technology, and start growing your own food, and maybe go on kibbutzes or something. Or do what you did, move to the woods.
Move to the woods and build a garden. So if anything the grocery store ever runs out, everybody knows Willis has a garden, and how long will I be able to keep it?
Don't tell them that. You've seen The Walking Dead, right? I mean, don't tell anybody where you are. Nothing good comes from that.
It is interesting. You just talked about Rome, though, which reminds me, you don't have to be religious to come up with these end times scenarios. Back in 1783, Edward Gibbons wrote a wonderful book called The Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire. And in that book, he came up with 5 different reasons why the Roman Empire decayed and fell apart. And he said these 5 reasons were it. Now, remember, this comes from 1783. He wrote this. Mm-hmm. Number 1, he said, sports and entertainment received more and more money while the plight of the poor was neglected. Never heard of that happening. Never. Number 2, he said the money went to the military rather than to the public good. Number 3, violence in both games and public life became more and more accepted and prevalent. And he pointed some really close similarities between what was going on in the Colosseum and the death of people for entertainment's sake in the Colosseum and what was happening on the street. Well, we could listen to that too. Number 4, he said people's faith in government was undermined, and justly so. He said the government did not live up to what they were supposed to be. 5, he said the thing that broke down the Roman Empire as well was that religions grew fragmented and became a cause of dissension rather than unity. Boy, these people are prophetic, aren't they? We're living now. We've probably always lived in these times, but the fact that we have social media and know about them so much more makes it, I think, in our day and age, much worse because these, we can spread these things abroad. People who never would know each other existed can now get on a computer, talk to somebody half a world away, spread these ideas around on their social media network, and just remind all of us of how terrible the world is. Is it any wonder that we wake up depressed in the morning sometime? Wow.
Indeed, unless you have a show called Garden of Doom, and then I've done jujitsu. I flipped the whole thing around. What about Ragnarok? What the Norse obviously, and it's not just Norse, the Germanic is part of Russia into the Celtic. It's all
sure.
Some
of the great Norse myths were written in Greenland. Yeah. Pretty close to home. Maybe even here in the United States. Who knows if the Vikings got to Newfoundland, or who knows they didn't come down to Cape Cod and go up the Mississippi and all this kind of stuff.
I think it's pretty established that some at least did. Ragnarok, it also ends with a giant serpent and sort of the hero savior of man.
And the world tree, and all this kind of stuff. It was big and popular, and it convinced a lot of the Vikings that was the way to go, man. Die in battle, and you get to escape it. So, it was you wonder how and why these things are always depressing, and yet on the one hand, they're depressing because they all seem to be talking about the same human condition, which seems to have been with us for 6,000 years. But they also talk about a new beginning. And, you would think, we've left one major world religion out, and that's Buddhism. And you would think in a religion like Buddhism, there wouldn't be quite so much of that. And I don't think there is quite as much, but it's still there. Buddha said that his teachings, his Dharma, was going to disappear in about 5,000 years from his passing. Now, that corresponds to our calendar to about 4600 CE. We're right now in 2023, and so we have to get through to 4600, and then the Buddha's working, his Dharma, his teachings are going to disappear. And at that time, he said that knowledge of the Dharma, or his teaching, Buddhism, will be lost as well. And the last of his relics will be gathered together in Bodh Gaya, and they will be cremated. And then he said there will be a new era in which the next Buddha, Maitreya, will appear. But it'll be preceded by, here we go again, the degeneration of human society. There'll be greed and lust and poverty and ill will and violence and murder and impiety, physical weakness, sexual depravity, societal collapse. Can't think of anything more, so I'll just leave it at that, but you get the idea.
Yeah.
And then he said even the Buddha himself will be forgotten. But this is going to be followed by, here we go again, like the millennium, a golden age. Nikaya wrote that at that period, brethren, there will arise in the world an exalted one, and fully awakened, abounding in wisdom and goodness, happy with knowledge of the worlds, unsurpassed as a guide to mortals, willing to be led. He will be a teacher for gods and men, an exalted one, a Buddha. And he by himself will thoroughly know and see, as if it were face to face this universe with its worlds of the spirits. Does that make you think multiverse or what? This universe with its worlds of the spirits, its Brahmas and its Maras and its world of recluses and Brahmins, of princes and peoples. And he will know and he will see them and he will lead this world in a new golden age. So even in Buddhism, we find a little touch of that terrible thing that's going to happen at the end. But at the end, on the other side, golden age just waiting to happen.
Well, even in Ragnorak, I mean, they have the seven realms, which could be multiverses if you don't want to look at it that way. But also, even in Ragnarok, there were survivors. I can't remember if it was two of Thor's brothers or two of his children, but two of his kids, adults. But they there were survivors even in Ragnarok. People think everyone died, but not exactly everyone. Yeah. I have some possibly random questions for you. I'm not sure if they are, if they're not. But somewhere this is going back to Christianity. I'm not sure if it's in Revelations or not, but at some point there's something about that there's going to be 144,000 witnesses, which some interpret to be survivors, which is a pretty small number. So what's that about the 144,000? Because, maybe in the year 2200 or 200, 300, that was a lot of people, especially if your world was, 500 miles in radius.
Well, when the book of Revelation was written, one of the seven seals opens the book up, and John looks into the book, who is said to be the author of Revelation. He looks into the seal, and he sees two groups of people. He sees that are saved, that are taken up to heaven. One of these groups, he says, there's a great cloud or a great crowd of witnesses. These are Gentiles, believers, who are taken up to heaven. There's a bunch of them, much more than 144,000. Okay. But he also sees 144,000 Jews, 12,000 from each of the 12 tribes. And these are going to serve as leaders on earth. So this is the upper echelon, the board of directors, so to speak. Now, of course, if you talk to the Jehovah's Witnesses, they have a different take on this. They believe that the 144,000 are actually 144,000 Jehovah's Witnesses, who are the elite, the CEOs, so to speak. So it isn't just 144,000 people who are taken out of this and serve as God's people. There's also this great crowd of Gentile believers along with them. But even still, seems like a pretty small number.
Yeah, but so even in religious orthodoxies, then there's still going to be an elite, because it's funny, sort of like the enemy of most, extreme groups is the elites, but you're going to end the elitism to get a new class.
Well, some people are more elite than others.
I guess if it's chosen by God, they're the right kind.
Yeah.
So I'll leave that one alone. But thank you for clarifying that, because that always confused me. All right, I have another one that's completely random and may in fact be completely nonsensical.
I doubt it.
And it has to do with the Tepi. So there's Gobekli and Karahan is the new one.
Karahan Tepe, yeah.
And I'm sure they'll find more. And
they already have. Yeah. They already have. And you'll love this. There are 7 of them that they've already found.
Wow. And I know that there's even older, the Harapan in Valley.
Yeah, there's a group of them right now that they've all been seen through ground penetrating radar and through a little bit that's showing, but they just barely beginning over there. Gobekli Tepe was the first, and for a long time, a lot of writers, including me, we didn't know any better. We thought, Gobekli Tepe is one of a kind, and it was this unbelievable temple that just shows up overnight, 10,600 years ago. And how did a group of hunter-gatherers living in Anatolia, which is present-day Turkey, how they all of a sudden learn how to build something as sophisticated as Gobekli Tepe? And we were saying, well, it stands alone. It's all by itself. But then a number of years ago, some of these other places started to be developed. Karahan Tepe is now getting all the print because it's even a little bit older than Gobekli Tepe. And yet they all seem to exist in the same area of the country. And in one sense, it answers a question, how did Göbekli Tepe people know how to build that sophisticated construct? Well, they had to practice on Karahan Tepe, except now it appears that Karahan Tepe is just not, it is just as, if not more, sophisticated than Göbekli Tepe. And so now the question is even bigger. How did these people who were hunter-gatherers one morning wake up and decide, let's not build one temple, let's not build one gathering place or whatever it is, Göbekli Tepe. Let's build a bunch of them, all in the same area. Why did they do it? How did they do it? Well, archaeologists are starting to try to learn how. They know where. They know when, because they can doubt it. But they don't know what it was. They don't know why it was built. Really, there's all kinds of ideas. It seems to be, Göbekli Tepe especially, seems to be some kind of a temple, which means there was some kind of religious thing going on there. But with Karahan Tepe, it goes way beyond a temple. It's obviously used for something else. Did people live there? And where did it come from? To build this kind of construction, you and I couldn't do it. We couldn't get our friends together and build something like that. How did they do it? And they did it quickly, and they did it right after the end of the last ice age, the Younger Dryas Ice Age.
Right, so you can cue the Graham Hancockians versus the Eric von Daniganians, right?
Yeah. Absolutely. They're going to be saying not only did they do these things and build these unbelievable megaliths, they either learned how to do it themselves or they were taught. And so you say, well, if they were taught, who taught them? Well, it was either a previous advanced civilization that lived during the Ice Age that was wiped out when the Ice Age happened, which incidentally was the very same date that Plato gives for the disappearance of Atlantis. Yeah. But so it could have been a group of people, a civilization that existed during the Ice Age that saw one of these great endings of history. And yet there were a few who managed to survive and a few who managed to escape and pass on their knowledge. That's one way of thinking this is what's going to happen if our world comes to an end. A few of us will make it and we'll begin again. Another golden age will start. Or did it come from someplace else? Did it come from teachers from another dimension? Did it come from teachers from space? And all of this kind of stuff. Aliens comes into it.
Don't forget the giants.
Oh, the giants. That's right. That's right.
I don't want to give this short trip. So where I was going with that is that the symbology on the tepes is, I mean, some of it's familiar, some of it's not. Some people think that some of it is the constellations or different constellations. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. Maybe the constellations came from the symbols there, not the other way around. Who knows? Yeah, I look in the stars. I don't see the same things that others see.
Yeah. I still try really hard to see a great bear when I look at the Big Dipper every morning, but I can't see a bear.
Like an overturned, like what are those? Those cards that Anyway,
it's right outside. It's right outside my front door every morning when I go out and sniff the breeze. I look up and I see the Big Dipper. The stars always pointing toward the North Star. I just find that's a ritual that I do every single morning when I can see it. And
I think everyone did it, which is why that whole thing is so prevalent. And the Sagittarius, the hunter, Orion, the hunter, and the Seven Sisters, which we can only see 6 of them now.
Yeah,
Subaru. But there's something in your neck of the woods, not that close, but it was called the Georgia Guidestones. I think they've recently been torn down.
Oh, I just wrote about them. I did a remake of my book Savannah, which is a story of a bicycle trip I took from the top of the Savannah, from the source to the sea, and I talked about stopping by the Georgia Guidestones. And now I couldn't believe it. In the remake, I had to talk about them being blown up. Wow.
Right. So they were blown up because I guess people thought that they were fake. But A, do you think they were fake? And B, did they have any sort of apocalyptic tone to them? And C, did they? Yeah. Is there any connection to the symbology on the Georgia Guidestones and the tepes or anything else that we touched upon?
Yeah. Well, the whole purpose of the Georgia Guidestones, according to this Mr. Christian, who wrote them, and nobody knows who he was for sure. The only one who knew his identity is now dead. But the one who financed them, the one who set them up, the one who gave him the design and everything else, he called himself Mr. Christian, and he worked through a local banker up there in Alberton. And when they built the Georgia Guidestones, they were particularly put on this spot of ground. He needed this spot of ground for some reasons. And one of the reasons given was that in case of a worldwide apocalypse, the Georgia Guidestones were designed to give instructions on how to repopulate the world. And they had 10 different instructions. I haven't got them in front of me, so I can't. But one of the big instructions was you have to keep the world population at I forgot the number, but it was a ridiculously small number.
It was like 225 million, something like that.
Something like that, yeah. And but the whole purpose of them being there was to give directions. And they gave, I thought, some pretty good ideas, about how to establish a world government that would would rule in peace, and how to keep your population in control. And they would dealt with ethics and dealt with morality, and they were written in all these different languages, and they were designed to withstand an earthquake right there if they needed to be, so that when the world collapsed, there would be the Georgia Guidestones with instructions on how to rebuild. The problem is that, of course, a lot of, fundamentalists thought this was of the devil. And they said, well, the world Guidestones, the Georgia Guidestones, for instance, they say we're supposed to kill off the great majority of people in the world today. Yeah. No, they never said that. They said, if it happens and you have to rebuild, watch your population, because that's going to be a problem. Well, that makes sense. It only does make sense. We all know the world is overpopulated now. So the Georgia Guidestones are very popular, and I mean, a very, Yoko Ono went up and she even used one of the commandments on the Georgia Guidestones in one of her songs. And I visited them, probably a dozen times, sometimes with my dowsing rods and everything else. And sure, there's energy lines running up through there. There's a matter of fact, there's a ley line that runs right through my house and my medicine wheel, right up through the Georgia Guidestones, continues on across the country and crosses over the great Lakota Sioux medicine wheel in North Dakota. So there's a lot of earth energy involved in that, a lot of other stuff. But I never had the idea that this was evil, or saying do this or say that. All I got out of it was that if the worst happens, if catastrophe happens, here's some good instructions on how to rebuild. And to me, they all made sense.
It's not telling you what you must do now. It's telling you how do you reconstitute.
Yeah. And they didn't make it to the catastrophe because somebody set a charge of dynamite. They still don't know who. And they blew up one of them. And because they were all connected, it was worried that people were really worried that if they blew up just one of them, the rest of them wouldn't be safe. And they didn't want all the people going up there. So they tore down all of them. So now I go.
Where are the other ones? Do we know?
Well, they just took them down, and I don't know if they're going to recast it or redo it or not. The whole town is caught up in a tremendous fight. Some people love the Georgia Guidestones in that town because tourism. It does draw in a lot of tourism. Some people hate them because they feel they're of the devil. And this Mr. Christian, everybody kind of thinks that he may have been, and I think it's probably a pretty good guess, perhaps a Rosicrucian. And the Rosicrucians have always been considered to be of the devil, so to speak, by Christian folks and all this kind of thing. So I don't know, but it's interesting you pick up on the Georgia Guidestones, because I never thought about it when we were thinking about this discussion today.
Well, good. Now I gave you something else to think about, which may lead to a new book, which may lead to another show. So hey,
well, I already covered it. It's called Savannah. Bicycle Journey Through Space and Time, and it's a story. It just came out. The second edition just came out a couple of weeks ago, and it's you can see it on my webpage, jimwillis.net, or it's advertised on my Facebook page, jimwillis.author. We did a couple of YouTube videos about it on my YouTube page, and when I wrote about
your YouTube page is great.
Oh, thank you. When I wrote about them in this reprint edition, I never expected that I was going to. I mean, in the first edition of the book, I talked about the Georgia Guidestones, but in the second edition, I never expected that when I wrote that book, they were going to be gone.
Right, well, now you're going to have a third edition where you can see, maybe you can compare it to other stuff, and you can give me some credit, or I'll write it forward or something.
Oh, okay. There you go.
Now, I don't know if you know the answer to this, but is there any end of days sort of parallels in what I'm going to call the New World, which is stupid because it's all the same, but sort of First Nation, sort of we'll take it from from the tip of Canada all the way down to Terra del Fuego, if there's any sort of commonalities or frequently encountered, or like 2 major or 3 major end of days. I know there's the Ages of Man and at least some of those cultures.
Well, some of probably the most popular are the Hopi beliefs. Because the Hopi believe that we are in a 4th age. 3 ages came before us. And each of those ages was brought to destruction, one through water, one through fire, one through flood. And then we're in the 4th age right now. And they believe that this 4th age is close to the end. And the Hopi, it's an extremely sophisticated belief. I don't want to dishonor them by just, going on too quickly. And I know we've been talking now for an hour and a half, so I know we're running out of time, but that's a great one to look at. There are others that are somewhat similar. Of course, everybody was aware of, the ghost dance, for instance, during the time of Sitting Bull, when the Indians were dancing and they believed that if they did the correct prayers and the right dances and chanted the right ways and wore the right clothing, that the buffalo would come back and the white people would disappear. They saw the coming of the Europeans as really the end, and in a way they were right.
Yeah,
I mean, more than just in a way, they were right. Period.
Oh, well, they got plague and famine too. Well, with it,
yeah. There are other concepts which have the idea of no beginning and no end. I think in some sense, the First Nation people are way ahead of us on this. A lot of their philosophers are much more comfortable with not having to try to picture a beginning and end. They said, we can't.
I don't want to burden
always
with
been here, always will be.
I have 2 thoughts. One, we can come back to sort of indigenous, whatever that means, indigenous end of days. Or I can leave it to Shaman Safford, who's kind of come back and maybe get him to cover those things. But I said last question, Chris, I don't want to leave out 2 continents. And again, the answer's probably been either the same, maybe you don't know, or it's too varied to say. But is there sort of like a commonality in Australian, and when I include Australian, I also include all of Oceania and sort of the South Pacific Islands and Africa, which I'm not going to ask you about Antarctica because we don't know if there's anybody there.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. To get an idea, if anybody wants a fun way to get some idea about Australian Aborigine ideas about the end, right, all you have to do is watch the first Crocodile Dundee movie. There's a scene in that movie where he and the woman reporter from New York, they're sitting out there in the middle of the outback, and she says, well, don't you have a saying about, what's going to happen to the world? And he says, just look across to those mountains. They were here way before we came. They're going to be here way after we go. And I love that concept. It just, they're, the mountains last forever. That's a common idea. Well, they don't last forever. Cosmologists will tell us that, but in terms of human life, pretty darn close to it.
Geologists will tell us that too.
Yeah. So there are different schemes of belief depending on who you're talking to. If you can talk to a shaman about it, I think it'd be wonderful. And let me know when he's going to be on, because I really want to hear that conversation.
Well, he's done one show with us before, but it wasn't as specific. But he's sort of agreed to do continuing series, and I'm sort of proud to say that
we didn't mention the Mayan, for instance. After I wrote Armageddon Now, and you remember I forgot what year it was, 2000, something like that, where the Mayan year was the Mayan calendar was going to come to an end.
Yeah.
boy, my phone was ringing off the hook to do interviews on that day. They wanted me on the phone when the world came to an end.
Right.
It didn't happen. I think the best we could come up with was that there was an explosion of a volcano in Iceland. I think that was the only thing that was close, but.
Yeah. Oh, I remember that too. Yeah. There's no air travel for a while, but yeah. I mean, I think
Right.
the best guess is that they ran out of space on their block
Yeah.
to keep riding them, and they had projected something like
yeah, and
2,000
every
years in advance.
Yeah,
That's pretty good planning.
every calendar comes to an end and starts over again. You know.
Indeed. Yeah. So, all right. Well, maybe we'll do a future show more on indigenous eschatology and something like that. But anyway, let's give a chance. I mean, you've said your website, you told about your YouTube channel, we've mentioned some of your books, but let's give you a chance to put them all in, on one time. Let's promote all things Jim Willis right now.
Oh, well, probably the easiest is just go to the website, jimwillis.net. And it has, 5 or 6 pages into it. And one of the pages says books, for instance, and it lists all the books that I've written and reviews, both good and bad, and all this kind of thing. And talks about what's coming up next. But one of the most important pages on that website is the contact page. You and I can talk to each other, and we know we're listening to each other. We have no idea who's listening in, and I like to hear from people. So if you want to contact me, just go to the contact page, and you can write me a note. I try to answer everyone that I can, and I'll know you're out there. And on the bottom of every page of the website, there's also a link to the Facebook. There's a Facebook icon to my Facebook page, and there is a YouTube icon for the YouTube page. So once again, jimwillis.net, and I hope to hear from you.
Yeah, why don't you tell them about the books that came out and then the forthcoming book?
Well, the book that just came out is called American Cults. It just went on sale Tuesday. And it's all about, just like what the topic says, American cults. It's cabals, corruption, and charismatic leaders. And it was a book that was fun to write in one way because it was a lifetime of experience dealing with cults. But it was terribly depressing in other ways because there are 5,000 to 6,000 cults operating in the United States right now. And I had to take the ones that were the most well-known and the ones that were very dangerous, the ones that were the most famous, because it is a book after all. And in doing so, I also discovered that those were also the ones that were the most depressing to read about. There's some terrible stuff going on, but it also gives advice about what a cult is and how to get out of it if you're in it, and how to get a friend out of it if he's in or she is in it. That book just came out. The next book that's coming out this spring, I don't know when yet. I haven't seen the galleys yet, but they're supposed to be sent to me within the next week or two, is a book called Cosmo and Me, which I really love because it's kind of a memoir autobiography. It's not really just an autobiography. I haven't got that much of an ego. But what it is the story of what it was like to be a spiritual seeker over the last 7 decades of American culture. Roughly speaking, American culture has changed during my life anyway. Every 10 years, it's a whole different culture. And each of those 10-year periods has demanded a different kind of spiritual approach. And that's what the book is about. How do you live in that spirit in this day and age? I always have to push my favorite book, the favorite book that I've written, was my first work of fiction. It was called The Wizard in the Wood, and I loved everything about that book. I loved the writing of it. I did my own audio book of it, so I had to learn the engineering skills to become an audio engineer. I've been in music my whole life, so I've done a lot of studio work, but I never knew what the engineers were doing on the other side of the the glass. Now I know, and it's in Kindle, and it's in also a paperback. And so that book out, the one that I'm working on right now, which will probably come out about a year from now, is a book that I'm really excited about too. It's about near-death experiences, and it's kind of a sequel to my book on out-of-body experiences called Quantum Akashic Field.
And by the way, The Wizard in the Wood is on Audible, and it has a 5-star rating. Look at that.
Oh,
You know what?
I'm all
I
for
have
that.
one credit.
Nice
I just
to
bought
know.
it.
That's great. The another book that's going to be coming out this summer is a book called Sabuko and Me, and it's the story of a spirit guide who I met through dowsing, who has been with me every day of my life since
And
I first
dowsing
found
is
him.
searching for water, for those of you who don't know.
Well, I not necessarily for water, but more for earth energies,
Oh.
and more just as a way of experiencing the unknown. I learned through dowsing that I can actually talk to Sabuko, and he has become my spirit guide. And I don't think there's a day has gone by in the last 12 years that he and I haven't had a serious conversation. And I know it makes me sound kind of wacky, but remember, I'm also a Christian minister, so I got one foot in this world anyway.
Absolutely. All right. Well, this is great. We've so many new ideas for possible future shows. It could be First Nation or Indigenous eschatology. It could be the American cults. It could be the book. Who knows?
Just give me a call, Jeff. I'm here anytime. I love talking to you.
I love talking to you too, but I'm very conscious about not overburdening any particular guest. But I'm not shy, and we'll schedule it up. But I thank you so much for your information. This is something that I think is really, really fascinating, in that it's so different, but really so similar. And yes, those of you worried we're in the end of times, people have always been worried that they're in the end of the times. But because this is the Garden of Doom, I can't say you're wrong. So that's bad. That's bad for business. So actually, listen, if anybody's worried about greed, whatever, I don't make $1 off the show. I probably never will. I don't even care about that. I just this is my sort of my intellectual and entertainment search for knowledge, and to meet intelligent, interesting, and fun people. And I have a relationship with Reverend Jim Willis, which are just Jim.
You're doing important work, Jeff, because how else is a community of like-minded people going to get together? And this is wonderful. This is the good use of the internet. I think you're doing important work. You really are.
Thank you. I can't thank you enough. I can't thank you enough for coming on. So everyone, follow Jim, subscribe to his YouTube channel, buy his books. I just use my credit on Audible to get Wizard in the Wind, or in the Wood rather, and I'm going to listen to it as soon as I'm done with the book that I'm listening to right now, which I'm getting to the final stretch of. So that is terrific. And I have read Censoring God, and which I loved, and I read the Akashic book as well, which was great. I have the religion book, and I have Armageddon. I really meant to read Armageddon before I got here, before I got to the show, but I failed in that, so I apologize.
Well, it's a tough book to read.
But most of your books are extremely easy to read, and they're the thoughts and are dense and tough, but the writing is not. You have a very good writing prose. So
thank you. I sure appreciate it.
Why you have 20 books. Anyway, thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of your day. And for those of you out there, please rate, review, refer, and I never say it, subscribe. Subscribe so the show automatically comes into your feed. Garden Views is a companion show. It's very different. It's more topical and sort of like things that you might see in the news or in the legal world or in the business world, but it's the same type of style and for the most part the same quality of guests, and again, it's me trying to find out things I don't know about that I want to, and hopefully you do too. So this week I'm recording with a gentleman who is an expert on ChatGPT, and that's very relevant. I've had guests on cryptocurrency and cybersecurity, but I've also guests on cannabis law and the moon and stuff like that. So anyway, check those things out. And Garden Views tend to be a lot shorter than Garden of Doom. And listen, if you think these shows are too long, listen at speed 1.5 or 2. I listen to myself at 2 times speed. I find myself much easier to listen to. Anyway, I thank you all for listening. Please listen again. Please refer to your friends and colleagues. And once again, thank you to Jim Willis. It's always a pleasure.
Thank you, Jeff. Appreciate it.